Hey gang, and welcome back to this video series on building my automated expense tracking system. Now, if you've been with me for the rest of this series, you saw me set up my spreadsheet, connect it to a tool called Budget Sheet so that my bank transactions can sync automatically into my spreadsheet. And then you also saw me try to make sense of the categories that Budget Sheet provided against the categories that I typically use. And gang, if you want to follow along a little easier, be sure to check out the link in the description either during or right after this video so that you can have your own guide as to how to get started building something along the lines of all this. So for this final-ish part of getting my system fully up and running, I'm going to show you today how I went ahead and set up the analysis for my income, my expenses, and my net. So basically taking all of the information from this transaction tab that's here thanks to Budget Sheet and putting it in a format that I could make sense of my spending on a monthly basis. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I did was just list out all of the columns that I wanted to have. So that includes the month, my total income, my total expenses, my net, which is the difference between the two. And then for my particular goals, I have categories that track whether my transactions were a transfer to my savings accounts or my investment account. So I'll include those two columns here as well. Okay, now let's start by populating the months. I'm just going to start with the first 3 months of the year for now, and I'm going to put in the first day of each month, and you'll see why shortly. Then I'll just resize and align my columns so that things look a little nicer. Okay, so the first thing I did was I wanted to reflect the month column. Instead of reflecting the first date of the month, I wanted it to reflect the actual month name and the year. Now, technically, if I had typed that information directly into the cell, Google Sheets wouldn't recognize this column or this cell as being a date value. And that's super important for the formulas to work. So here's how I went about making the date appear in the format that I actually wanted. I went to Format, Number, Custom Date and Time. And you can see here sort of the syntax for how the date value is set up. So I erased all of these just to start with a clean slate. And then I first put in the month. When I click the month, you can see all of the different options that Google Sheets gives me. So I just chose to show my month as an abbreviation. Next, I added the year in, and then I chose to put the year in as 4 digits. So once I hit apply, you can see the format of my month column has changed, but the date values are still the same. So the only thing I didn't do, I didn't put a space in between the month and the year. So let me go back and quickly do that. Okay, that looks much better. Now let's focus on populating our income column, and I'm just going to start in January first. So to populate this, we'll need to use a sum-ifs function. So if you're not familiar with formulas, this might be where the video gets a little dicey, but try to follow along as best you can because they're actually pretty simple once you know the syntax and generally how they work. So the sum-ifs function, the first parameter I need to enter is the column that I want summed, which is going to be the amount column from my transactions tab. And now every other argument for this formula is going to tell Google Sheets under what circumstances to sum that amount column. So I want to do it for every instance where in my category column, the word income appears. Because again, we're totaling my income. And I want to make sure that I'm doing it for the right date period. So let's start by saying any transactions where the date in column A is greater than whatever in the cell next to it. Which in this case, remember, our date value is January 1st. So once I hit enter, just to check how my formula is working out, I can see this number. By the way, gang, the numbers you see in this video are not representative of my actual numbers. I made some tweaks to different things before filming this. But you can see the total here is reflected as nearly 14,000. Now, I already know from fudging my own data that I did not make 14,000 alone in the month of January. But remember, for my formula logic for right now, the only date criteria I had was for transactions greater than January 1st. And we are well past January. But let me first at least go back in the transactions tab and double check that that number is what I get when I total everything in the sheet. That is income, which it is. So that at least tells me that the rest of my formula is working correctly. So all I need to do is add the part to the formula that restricts the transactions to only show for the month of January. And the way that I'm going to do that is just adding to the end of my formula the criteria that it should only check for dates in column A of the transactions tab, less than, in this case, C8, the cell directly underneath January 1st, 2026, which is February 1st. So now we have the correct number for January. And because our formula is correctly configured, I'm going to copy and paste it down through March. Okay, now let's move on to the expenses column. This is going to use a very similar setup, except for the fact that we want to sum anything that isn't income. So I'm just going to click into that cell where we entered the formula for January, highlight everything to copy it, and then paste it into the cell next to it. So in cell E7, where I'm calculating my January expenses, I can see my formula set up. And instead of filtering for all transactions that contain the word income, we want to filter for all transactions that don't contain the word income. So I'll add the do not equal sign like so. And then I can see that the C7 and C8 references in my formula still correctly reference the date frame that I want the transactions to pull in from. So I'll hit enter. There are my expenses. Now, because my expenses are negative in the transactions tab, it shows as a negative number. I would rather this be a whole number, so I'm going to quickly go back into my formula and basically take that sum if formula and plug it into a new absolute value function, just by adding the ABS to the front and then the parentheses at the end, so that I'm pulling the absolute value, which will never be negative. So now that my formula is correctly set up, let's copy and paste down again. Okay, and I want to make sure my expenses are in currency format like my income, so I'm just going to highlight my income cells and then use the format painter brush to copy the formatting over. Okay, now remember from my last video, gang, I like color, so I went ahead and filled my income cells with a light green and my expenses cells with a light red. On to my net. So my net is going to be my income amount for that month minus my expenses. Super easy. And I'll copy and paste this formula down too. So my subtraction is working, but what I would really like is to be able to see if my net is negative, that number appears red, and if it's positive, keep it green. So I'm going to just select the whole column F here, and then open my conditional formatting rules by clicking Format, Conditional Formatting. And I basically need to add two rules. One for any time the cell value in column F is below 0, and one for every time it's greater than. So let's start with the greater than. I'll change the format rules to greater than, set this field to 0. And then as I'm making the changes, you can see it changing in real time in column F, which is super helpful. So for any time that the value is greater than 0, I want the cell color to be empty, but I want the font color to be green. And now I'll go in and do the same exact thing for my negative numbers, except I want that font to be red. Okay, great. Now let's work on these savings and investment columns next. One of the things that I like to track is how much money I'm putting into savings each month, if I am doing that, and how much I'm maybe putting into investments. And this will require similar logic to what we did for the income and expenses column. So I'm going to grab one of those formulas again, copy, paste it into my savings cell in G7, and I'll change the logic so that we're pulling transactions that have my savings transfer category included. And then I'll do the same thing for the investments column. And for this example, I'm showing a $500 transfer into one of my savings accounts, but it's showing negative. So I'm going to add in that absolute value function again so that we don't have that happen, and do the same thing for the savings column. Okay, cool. We have 2 working formulas in each column, so I'll just copy and paste them down and align them so that they look pretty, and also give them the proper formatting. And for this little umbrella column header, I'm just going to merge these 2 cells, align the text to be centered, and then fill it as well. Okay, gang, so I'm a visual person, and then the last big thing that I wanted to do here was to add a chart that could show my income, expenses, and net over time pretty easily. So I just selected the table of values that I wanted to include. So everything from C6 in my case to F9. And then I clicked Insert Chart. So this is the default chart setting that Google Sheets gave me, but I need to go in and make a few tweaks. So first, my chart type is going to be a series because I want to use both bars and lines. And as I was about to go in and customize the individual measures, I realized that my chart wasn't showing the way that I wanted to, because I don't want the income, expenses, and net to appear on the bottom the way it is now. I want the bottom to show the actual month. So I went back into the setup section. Honestly, the answer here was not intuitive of what to do, so I sort of clicked around and lucked out. And unclicking switch rows and columns seemed to do the trick. So if you have a similar issue, try that first. But now that my axes were correct, I went into the customize section and then went in and customized each individual measure. So my income bars, I want it to be green. That was the major thing. My expenses, I also needed to change from line to column and make those a nice red color. And then my net, I typically like to have that as its own distinct line, so I made it super bright blue. And then for all of the series or measures in my chart, I wanted to show data labels for what those amounts were. Okay, so there's my chart. I'm just gonna pop it up on top of this little table that I have going. Now that I see it the way I want it laid out, I went ahead and just changed a few extra things, like changing the chart title up here, like removing the background color and the borderline. And I also chose to hide the grid lines in the sheet just because I like the look of a nice clean sheet, and just added lines to my table below myself. Now, gang, just to show you how the chart works, if I were to add a month on, like let's say I add April, the chart doesn't update automatically in this case. You can always go in and change that just by selecting the data range and making sure that it includes the last row you want included in your chart. I also don't love the grid lines, so I played around with that to try to figure out how to take those out. And then the last thing was that I didn't love how far the months were on my x-axis from the 0 starting point. And Google Sheets did that because I have a negative net number, so it just wanted a way to show that. But I adjusted the minimum value of the axis just to bring that closer. Yep, that's what I like. And then I decided that I would go ahead and just add rows for the rest of the year, because I anticipate using this at least through December. So I selected March and April, highlighted all of the columns that I wanted included, and then dragged down. And because I did it this way, that is why May, June, July, August, and the rest of the year was able to populate automatically without me having to go in and adjust the date. And then the final thing I did, just to be a little fancy, I wanted a way to indicate what the current month is based on whatever time I'm looking at this table. So I did this for February. And I basically said in my formula logic, if today is greater than whatever is in C8, which we all know is February 1st, and today is still less than whatever the date is in C9, which we know is March 1st, then show me that it's for the current month. Otherwise, don't show me anything. So I can see that February worked out perfectly. And technically, if I copy and paste that formula for January and for the rest of the year, it should show me nothing. And there you have it, gang. I'll probably end up adding things around budgeting and my expense categories at some point later on. But in terms of getting up and running for the next month, which was my goal, I have my system in place. I'm syncing my transactions automatically, and I'm calculating my income and expenses automatically too, so that I can drill down to my net, which again, my net will tell me how much money I can put towards savings, investments, or other things. Be sure to check out the link in the description for a light, easy guide to help you get started with some of the stuff we've covered in this series. If this video was helpful, please give it a thumbs up. If you have tips or questions, please let me know in the comments. And for more videos like this, be sure to subscribe.